Welcome, everyone. My name is Ashley Studholme with the Prince William Conservation Alliance, and thank you for joining us for tonight's program, Will We Ever Get Metrorail in Prince William, with opening remarks from Supervisor Angry and a presentation from Charlie Grimes. So to kick us off, if I can find it, here we go. Here at the Prince William Conservation Alliance, you can check out what we're up to at our webpage at pwconserve.org. And here we have various articles, and then you can come and see our upcoming events from our calendar page. You can see that we have our Metrorail for Prince William. And then this weekend, we have a tree giveaway and a walk at Conway Robinson, which there's still slots available if you wish to join us for that. And then we have a lot of other programs in the works, and we offer these free of charge from the generosity of people like you. And if you would like to support us, you can just easily click here, join us, and that'll pull up a donation page where you can continue to support our work. And I also wanted to mention that tonight's program is kind of a continuation of a series of programs looking at building people-centric transportation networks and moving away from perhaps more the car-centric models that we tend to see. And you can find all of those at our YouTube channel, and there's even a playlist there if you wish to see under sustainable transportation, where you can see some of our previous discussions, including ones that Charlie presented before that. So this is kind of a continuation of that and linking transportation with land use. And with that, we're going to get started with the reason why we're here. And we'll begin with opening remarks from Supervisor Victor Angry. He's the Neabsco District Supervisor, as well as the Commissioner on the Transportation Planning Board and Chairman of PRCT. PRTC. Wow, I kept flipping those in my head.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Supervisor Angry, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, and thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Kim, and thank you, Charlie, and thank you everyone else for having me do these opening remarks for a very important topic. I can say that how did I hear about Metro to Prince William County? 2019, when I first ran, when Supervisor John Jenkins passed away in office, and I ran for his position, one of the questions that Senator Scott Servell asked me is, how do you feel about the Blue Line to Prince William County? And of course, being a military person, taking the bus into DC every morning, Omni ride, that's always an option, but it was never a reality. Between the bus and VRE, that was how I would move to get into the city. Makes a whole lot of sense, but one of the key thing was, why isn't it here already? And even to have this discussion in 2022 still leads to, why isn't it here already? And the longer we wait, the more dollars are involved. And so I look at where we are now. For my opening remarks, I just want to leave you all with what the opportunity is that we have. I don't know if you read that article discussing, and this is in no way saying that Potomac Mills Malls is leaving us, but it was, what could that look like if you envision the future of that area and this eastern end of the county and Metro really coming down in Blue Rail? What would that look like? Then if you reimagine that, it's definitely the word of the day is density. And how do we get an opportunity where housing should be and residential connection should be to bring in a thing such as the Metro. And that's the missing element here, the missing ingredient. So between that opportunity, which is just more of a visionary concept, but what is happening with the North Woodbridge project, and even what I have going on in the Quartz District with that development, it creates what I hope would be enough density that Metro could take a serious look at how that opportunity could present itself. Now, Senator Servell has since got another approval to do another study, to actually do the study again down here in the corridor. And you may have seen some of the graphics of how that line could look. So it's back on the table for more discussions. I think this is an opportunity for us to really capitalize on it, because, you know, we now have projections and plans for increase in density that really is always the missing ingredient to how does a metro line get here. The issue is always going to be cost. So that's a big ticket item. And that's where TPB, MBTC, that's where these organizations come in to really help and assist us. But also I will throw in there that the VRE is currently being revamped, if you will. So with the Long Bridge project that has been funded to create, you know, fix out that bridge to have the train system go two ways, will be a huge improvement. I don't necessarily know if that's going to hinder anything with Metro, because I think all options of commuter transportation will help us in assisting. The number one goal of what we're trying to do is get cars off the road and greenhouse gas emissions, and how are we more earth friendly. So I think both of these are actually all three of these, VRE, Metro, and our bus system. How do we marry them all up together to create all of these opportunities, not just on weekdays of commuting to work, but also after hours of, you know, weekend travel, getting into the city and just really enjoying all the experience of mobility and movement around the county and the northern region in itself. So I could probably say that all day, but I'm gonna pause there and just really thank you all for hosting this and having this conversation. And like I said, I'm gonna stay tuned in, but I'm gonna jump on another call and just kind of listen in and then pop back in. Hopefully I can get off this next one and join back in with this conversation. So thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you everyone for having me.
Thank you, Supervisor, and I hope that you'll be back to join us for the discussion and to listen in on Charlie's presentation. So thank you.
And you've got a great presenter there, Mr. Charlie Grimes. You know, so he not only talks great transportation, you can walk trails with this man and enjoy nature in itself. So thank you.
Well, that's a better introduction than I could do, but I'll do one anyway. So now we're going to move on to our presenter, Charlie Grimes. He is a founding member of Prince William Conservation Alliance and is our mobility chair, and is just a wealth of knowledge about all things transportation. And as I mentioned before, if you didn't catch the last episode, if you will, of sustainable transportation and how to green up our transportation network, I highly recommend that you do so. But tonight we're going to continue to explore the connection between transportation and land use through the lens of Metrorail. So Charlie, thank you so much for being with us, and I will pass it on to you.
Thank you, Ashley. The question is, will we ever get Metrorail in Prince William? And in order to really understand the answer, we need to explore that question in some depth. So I'm going to give you some context and some history tonight so that we have a better grasp of the choices that we face and whether we're going to get Metro in Prince William or whether we're not. This is the moment where one touches the keyboard and nothing happens. Okay. So what's proposed is that under the more recent study by the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, we could extend Blue Line south into the Triangle area. That would give us 6 stations in Prince William County. Another alternative is to extend the Yellow Line from a different spot, also in Prince William County, essentially the same 6 stations. In both cases, Fairfax would have Fort Belvoir connected to the Metro system. And that's one of the main objectives, because there's more people that work at Fort Belvoir than live at Fort Belvoir. So commuter congestion is a problem clogging the highways, and Metrorail is viewed as a solution to commuter congestion. Get into the Wayback Machine back around 1940. Our Fairfax County was farm country. It was the milk shed, dairies all over the place, sending milk into Washington, D.C. In Prince William County, with all of 20,000 people, which was only twice the number of people we had in 1800. So we had about 20,000 people, a lot of farmers. If you went down Smoketown Road, you'd see pig farms and you'd see smoke from the whiskey distilleries along Smoketown Road. We didn't have electricity to all the houses in Prince William. In fact, we didn't have electricity to all the houses in Prince William until the 1960s. And if you really wanted to commute into Washington, D.C., you ought to live in Manassas, because you could take the Southern train into Washington, D.C. There wasn't a particularly good way for you to drive into Manassas. Route 1 was a busy, clogged highway with lots of intersections that slowed you down. Look at the population pattern of Prince William County since the 1940s. You can see that we've had an incredible amount of growth. We've gone from 20,000 people to over 480,000 people today. And it hasn't been a steady pattern of growth. It's not like the state of Virginia, which has been growing largely in a consistent percentage each year. We had a huge boom in the 1960s and in the 1970s. That's when Prince William really surged in its population. And the answer as to why did that happen is Shirley Highway. What you know is I-395 started off as the Shirley Highway. That road and then later roads is the reason that Prince William County has the population that it has today, that we've had the population boom we have had in the last 50 years. In other parts of Virginia, we haven't had that population boom. Something special here, and the secret sauce, one of the special characteristics, is we built a road to Washington, D.C. That turned us into a bedroom community. Even today, 50% of us drive out of the county to go to a job in Fairfax, Alexandria, Arlington, Washington, D.C., Loudoun County. And those workers who are commuting, thanks to all of those great commuter roads that we've built, those workers are having lunch in somebody else's jurisdiction. They're paying sales taxes in somebody else's jurisdiction. And those office buildings, those commercial properties, are in somebody else's jurisdiction. So Arlington County, half of the property taxes in Arlington County come from commercial property. In Prince William County, only 15% is coming from commercial property. You know who pays the remainder of the property taxes? It's the homeowners. If you want more government services because you have good property taxes, then you want to draw jobs into Prince William County rather than export workers on a commuter road or commuter rail out of Prince William County. So one of the challenges to consider if you're talking about bringing Metrorail to Prince William is, will it really get you what you want? Or will it just get you higher property taxes or lower government services? Shirley Highway was planned as a bypass around Fort Belvoir and into Washington, D.C. At the time, Route 1 was so crowded with businesses and houses, it was not realistic to expand or widen Route 1. And the road got planned in the 1930s. It got a finalized route in 1941, and that was before December 7th, 1941. And even before December 7th, the decision had already been made to move the War Department and the Navy Department to a new headquarters in Northern Virginia. So we ended up building the Pentagon, home of what's now the Department of Defense in Northern Virginia. The federal government was really interested in expanding the capacity of moving people around Northern Virginia because that's where the headquarters of the military was. Now, it took 17 years to build the first version of the Shirley Highway, 17 miles from the Occoquan River up to the Potomac River. And the federal government built the top 5 miles or so from the Potomac River down to Route 7. This is what we built. We built a 4-lane divided highway. And we thought that we were going to have a traffic load like this. Wouldn't it be nice to be on Shirley Highway with the traffic like this? We knew that we were going to have a lot of congestion around the Pentagon. People had to move from one road to another road. So the very first mixing bowl is right south of the Pentagon at Washington Street. And that's where the cars mixed in with each other on this new our limited access highway with all of these interchanges. A lot of money was spent building interchanges rather than intersections so that people wouldn't be stopped at stoplights. So we built south from Washington into the Route 7 and then further south onto Fort Belvoir. In 1949, we finally opened a 2-lane segment from Fort Belvoir, Virginia 617 to the Occoquan River. We didn't have a whole lot of money then. The federal government wasn't pouring money into transportation until 1956. So we couldn't get the road finished until we got some more grants, and we built the last 2 lanes that got you up to a 4-lane divided highway in 1952. And of course, we are still widening the Shirley Highway. Wasn't an interstate at the start. One of the reasons it wasn't an interstate is there was no interstate system until 1956. Another reason is we had the Washington and Old Dominion Railroad, and it had a crossing over the Shirley Highway. So until the Washington and Old Dominion Railroad went out of business, we couldn't make Interstate 95 north of the Occoquan River. So Shirley Highway becomes I-95 in 1966. And in 1976, when we finally figure out we're not going to send through commuters through Washington, D.C., we renumbered it I-395 and made I-95 go west or go east over to the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. We're moving people through the area. That's the whole point of all these transportation systems, is we're moving people. But these people are in cars. And so we have to build roads because we've got all of these people in all of these cars. And if you look at all those cars in the picture there, you'll see there's one person in each car. So we've been upgrading the Shirley Highway, I-95, now I-395 for all of these years. And for all of these years, we've had cars clogging the Shirley Highway. That's the problem, right? If you define cars as the problem, you're defining the problem in a way that you'll never fix. We have reached the point with I-395 that we really can't widen it anymore, just like we couldn't widen Route 1 in the 1930s without disrupting too many houses and too many businesses along the edge of I-395. So our option of build another lane, we're about to finish building the last lane from the Occoquan River south to a little bit into Prince William County. And that's about the end of the game. If you go up to the new mixing bowl, which is where I-495, I-395, and I-95 all merged together up at Springfield, that's the newly named area for the mixing bowl, we got 50 ramps, an incredible amount of infrastructure. If you love infrastructure, you're going to love this type of project. But again, if you look at a lot of the cars that we're moving through this intersection, through this interchange, you're seeing a lot of cars that are single occupancy vehicles, SOVs, cars with one person, maybe 2 people in them. And where's all that traffic coming from? It's not coming out of nowhere. It's coming out of Prince William and now Stafford and then Caroline and even Richmond. We are expanding our highways, inducing more people to drive on those highways and increasing the number of cars going up the interstate. And every one of those cars is kicking out greenhouse gas emissions. Even the electric cars are being powered by electricity that comes in part from power plants fueled by natural gas and coal. So we are, every time we increase the number of cars on the road, every time we increase the vehicle miles traveled, we're increasing the greenhouse gas emissions. The county's committed to cutting its emissions to 50% of its 2005 level in the year 2030. And the only way to do that is going to be to reduce the emissions from the transportation sector, as well as to insulate houses and put solar panels on houses and buildings and have green energy from various power plants. But you can't get there from here unless you reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from our cars. We're not going to have totally electric vehicles in 2030 either. So we're going to have to reduce the miles that our cars drive. Now, we have a whole lot of people driving in these cars because it's a lot cheaper to live in Prince William and to get a house. When I moved here, I couldn't afford a house in Arlington County. I couldn't afford a house in Fairfax County. I ended up in Prince William County because that's where I could qualify for a mortgage. And so I drove every day with a carpool in order to get to my day job in Washington, D.C. And the trade-off is all of that personal time sitting in the car as a commuter rather than having quality time at home. And this has been known as a problem in Northern Virginia since the 1950s. We have understood that building transportation infrastructure has negative impacts. In Arlington County in the 1950s and the 1960s, proposals to expand highways were highly controversial. In the District of Columbia, proposals to create a whole new loop of highways inside the District of Columbia were highly controversial. And if you're thinking of the problem as how do I move cars, you're not paying attention to the problem of how do we get a high quality community. So I'm going to ask you to redefine the problem before you decide that Metrorail is the solution. First plan for Metrorail is 1959. And in Virginia, we were going to have one line extending down to Huntington. We were also going to have, as part of the mass transit survey, the proposal for curing traffic congestion in the Washington, D.C. area, we were going to have an express bus system. So we've always been thinking of express buses together with rapid transit rail as part of the package for how do we move people without putting them all in a car? How do we get people north and south? How do we get people around the region without having to create these wide highways that and accommodate all of the different cars? And if you note at the bottom there, it took 27 years from the time that we were sketching out this Metrorail before the first red line trains were running in the bicentennial year. Attitudes changed in the 1960s. The idea that we could build our way out of congestion, that we could add another lane of traffic for cars, became clear that that was not a viable solution. Now, this is the 1960s. Today's 2022. But if you ask most of the people that are stuck in traffic, you ask them, what's the solution to this problem? They're going to say, oh, my inner engineer says that we should build another lane on this highway and tear down the schools and the houses and the parks in order to build another lane on the highway. But practically, that's not a viable solution. We've been working since the 1960s to come up with alternatives to building another wide lane on the highway. One of those was, of course, the Metrorail system. That was going to be associated with an inner loop of highways through Washington, D.C. Part of the trade-off is that inner loop of highways was canceled. The Three Sisters Bridge over the Potomac River was canceled. And the money for those highways was redirected to building the Metrorail system. And we sacrificed the median of the Shirley Highway and converted it to a dedicated busway. So today, of course, it's high occupancy vehicles, but we had dedicated busway in the middle of the Shirley Highway, moving people, not cars. Now, we've been planning since 2008 to extend Metrorail to Gainesville. I was part of the Citizens Advisory Group that worked on the 2008 comprehensive plan. And we spent all our time talking about roads. Then out of the blue, a future transit alternatives map appeared at the very end of the process. And it sketched out the orange line going to Gainesville. And the comprehensive plan, even today, includes a policy 3 to develop alternative transit concepts rather than just simply widen roads. However, nobody stood up and said, we think it's a good idea to build Orange Line to Gainesville. You won't find any government officials that I've run into that have even suggested in the last 20 years or the last 14 years that this is something that we need to spend some time working on. Instead, we've widened I-66 and we'll end up with basically bus rapid transit down I-66 or in the express lanes of I-66. There have been people who've championed extending the Virginia Railway Express from Manassas out to Haymarket. When studied in 2017, it became clear that you could build a very expensive rail line to Haymarket. And what they did is simply move the same commuters that were driving to Broad Run. They would just park at Haymarket. We didn't generate any new commuters. The Virginia Railway Express proposal was re-examined in 2021. Delegate Danica Rome had the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation take another look at the project, and it came back with the same answer. A whole lot of cost, not a whole lot of benefits. We don't generate a lot of new customers if we extend the Virginia Railway Express west of its current end point at Broad Run. So that option's essentially dead in the water. And today we've been widening I-66. We finished the widening project at the end of this year in theory. Anybody driving on I-66 can see the progress that's underway. And the County of Fairfax threw almost $60 million into the pot to make sure that the median strip of I-66 stayed wide enough for a future extension of the Orange Line. But that's only going to Stone Road west of Centerville. Prince William County didn't put any money in the pot, and there's no median west of Stone Road that could accommodate the Orange Line. There's really no opportunity for us to move Metrorail into Prince William County with an Orange Line extension to Gainesville. So that one may or may not show up in people's dreams of the future, but it's not a realistic alternative. However, extending the blue line or the yellow line down to Quantico is still a viable option. Our Representative Jerry Connolly has been a champion at the federal level, pushing for that proposal. He was the Providence District representative on the Fairfax Board of Supervisors, then the chair of the Fairfax Board of Supervisors, very intimately familiar with the transportation issues in Eastern Fairfax and Eastern Prince William County. And with support from our state delegates and state senators in the General Assembly, the 2020 General Assembly funded this study to determine if it was feasible for us to extend Metro down to Quantico. Again, here's the blue line proposal with 6 stations in Prince William County: North Woodbridge, landing at Prince William, Potomac Mills, Potomac Town Center, Southbridge, and Triangle, or just past Rosie's Casino. Here's the yellow line proposal, also coming all the way down south of the town of Dumfries. Let's question, why are we doing this? The obvious answer, and the first answer you're going to get from anybody, is traffic here really sucks. We really got to do something about traffic. Now, I mentioned several times, we're not going to expand I-95 again. Virginia state government just committed to a big rail expansion with the Long Bridge that Victor Angry talked about, so we can run Amtrak and VRE trains more often along the current CSX rail line from Richmond up into Washington, D.C. So the state looked at the option of expanding 95 and said, we could expand 95, we could spend a huge amount of money, and in 10 years, 20 years, when we finish doing it, we wouldn't have improved congestion because we'd have added more cars to it. Why don't we expand the rail network instead? So our passenger rail network that already exists for Amtrak and VRE is getting a huge upgrade. We're going to get another rail track through Prince William County, and you'll see a capacity expansion for people taking the train, going where the tracks go, or not necessarily. Tracks don't go to Fort Belvoir. So tracks don't go to Dumfries. Tracks don't go to Potomac Town Center. Don't go to Potomac Mills. So the expansion of VRE and Amtrak doesn't necessarily solve the problem of moving people that we have in Prince William to the places they want to go. And we know we're going to have more people. We know we're going to have more jobs. So we know we're going to have more traffic. One of the reasons that you'll hear people talk about we need Metro in Prince William is a recognition that there's a lot of economic revitalization around the metro stations. The red circle here shows you where the Boston Metro station was in the 1970s. If you look just above it, the IHOP is still there today, but everything else has been transformed. So our economic development in Arlington County, triggered by their decision to run Metro under Wilson Boulevard and Fairfax Boulevard, has been extraordinary. It is a worldwide example of how smart transportation planning and smart land use planning, if integrated, can create a community that is high quality, because there's not as much traffic on Wilson Boulevard and Fairfax Boulevard today as there was in the 1970s. They have added all those people and all those buildings and all those jobs without expanding traffic, because they use the transit system as their way to move people. This is the Roslyn-Boston corridor today, with all the economic revenue generating commercial property that helps keep property taxes in Arlington County low. Wouldn't it be nice if we had something like that in Prince William? Another reason to consider extending Metrorail is looking at the issue through an equity lens. The orange colored areas are our equity emphasis areas, or our census tracts that have a concentration of low income individuals and racial and ethnic minorities. These are the people that have been underserved by public investment in the past. They're not living at the top of the privileged ladder. They're living at the bottom of the economic challenges. And if we want to try to deal with the equity lens and environmental justice opportunities, one of the things we need to do is to build public infrastructure to enhance these communities, to plus up these neighborhoods, and to make it possible for the folks that are not at the top of the ladder to get a chance to climb a few rungs without having to spend such a high percentage of their family income on transportation. This is the pattern of minority communities along the opportunity route for us to be building Metro. And you can see here in much of Northern Virginia and more focused on Prince William County, if we built Metrorail as proposed, we'd be touching on many of the equity emphasis areas and offering the people who live there greater opportunity for higher paying jobs without having to buy their own individual cars for every individual in the house to drive to a separate job in a separate place and clog the highway with another single occupancy vehicle. I'm just repeating everything the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has recommended. I haven't got a single original idea in this presentation tonight. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, or COG, is also highlighting the need for us to put affordable housing near transportation transit capacity places. We need to make it easy for people in affordable housing to get to affordable transportation. If you put your affordable houses in Nowheresville, then everybody has to buy a car, and you don't get affordable transportation, and you drain the family budget for those folks. If you put affordable housing near transit stations, then people have affordable transportation. Amazon is committed to this in Arlington, where they're building one of their major headquarters units, and they're investing in lower cost affordable housing at the metro stations up in Arlington. They recognize the need to look at this issue through the equity lens. Now, one of the problems we have in Prince William is we haven't really paid attention to what Arlington figured out in the 50s and the 60s. We're still putting development in places where there's no public transportation. The Independent Hill Small Area Plan is west of all of the bus routes for OmniRide. There ain't no way to get there from here on a bus if you're going to live in Independent Hill. You're going to have to get a car. And everybody who lives in Independent Hill is going to have to get a car and drive to wherever it is they want to go. And every trip is going to involve another car on the highway, because we have planned to put houses in places not next to transportation. If you put the houses here and the transportation there, you're going to end up with car congestion on the road between here and there. Let me repeat. If you put the houses here, the transportation there, you generated the problem. Housing is the problem, not cars. Where we put housing is the issue. That's what drives whether we need transportation capacity upgrades and what sort of upgrades are realistic. In the study that was done recently about extending Metro to Quantico, there were really multiple choices examined, including the blue line and yellow line extension, but also bus rapid transit, because I-95 with its express lanes, reversible express lanes, offers that possibility. VRE could be upgraded, but because it's getting upgraded already, they didn't look at that particularly well. And then we could have just express bus routes rather than bus rapid transit. And if you're a transportation whiz, you'll understand the distinction better. But the bottom line is you get a little less service out of an express bus route, but a little more flexibility in where it could go. It's not easy to add Metrorail to the metro system. The metro people aren't interested in adding Metrorail capacity all the way to Triangle. They're really interested in fixing their problems inside the District of Columbia, inside the Beltway. Prince William County doesn't belong to the Metro Compact. We haven't paid anything to be part of what's been already built. Odds are pretty good that if we join the Metro Compact, we'll be asked to pony up a share to pay for some of the previous infrastructure that's already there, not just pay for air extension, but to pay for the services that our trains are going to run on once they get onto existing Metro. And then, of course, you're going to have to pay to run Metro every year. And that's going to be perhaps $100 million a year for Prince William County. That would be half of all of the money that we spend on roads now. So operations and maintenance is a factor to be considered, but the front factor to consider is the cost of actually building the infrastructure, building the track, building the rail line. When they looked at the choices for building the rail line, it'd be 26-mile extension, 10 new rail stations, 4 in Fairfax, 6 in Prince William. And the short blue line, which would come to only Potomac Mills, was 13.6 billion. B with a billion, 13.6 billion. The most expensive option, the yellow line, would be 27.5 B with a B billion. So it's not cheap. It's not pocket change. And in order for us to get the money, we're going to have to go and ask the state of Virginia, would you please finance this project and help us out? Virginia reallocates the transportation dollars the federal government provides, and they have a pretty analytical process for evaluating the most cost-effective projects. And the SMART scale process, with its analytical rankings of cost effectiveness, allocates about $1 billion every 2 years. Remember the numbers: 13.6 billion, 27.5 billion. State of Virginia every 2 years allocates about 1 billion. And so this is the rankings. They go through a round of awarding. Every 2 years they award grants. And so if they're going to award $1 billion every 2 years, how long will it take for us to get 13.6 billion to $27 billion to build Metro to Triangle? Competition is intense for that money. Metro, I mentioned, is interested in another alternative. They looked at expanding their core capacity. They're constrained by the tunnel at Roslyn, which can handle only 26 trains an hour. They can't put the silver line, the blue line, and the orange line through that tunnel fast enough. So they'd like to build another tunnel. But if you build another tunnel, it just dead ends in DC unless you build another set of tracks in DC. So they'd like to build a network of tracks in DC paralleling the current tunnel. And then they looked at where they wanted to go, and they ended up with Georgetown and National Harbor as the places they wanted to connect with the expanded capacity in the District of Columbia. And that's where they'd like to spend $20 billion in expanding that capacity in that area, none of which would extend Metro to Potomac Mills or to Triangle. And they'd get 180,000 new weekday trips because the area is so densely developed. There's a lot of customers living right near a metro station who would take the train if they built that network. If we built our train system as proposed in the study, we'd get a lot fewer customers taking Metrorail, blue line or yellow line. So for us to compete for federal grants and for us to compete for regional grants to expand Metro, we've got to somehow explain why our proposal is more economically appropriate or most socially equity appropriate than the proposal to build a core network extending to National Harbor and Georgetown. We're also competing with other projects in Northern Virginia. There's a long-range transportation plan produced by the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. And when they last estimated the extension of Metro to Potomac Mills, they really lowballed it. 1.5 billion is what they guesstimated in that particular plan. 13.6, 27, as opposed to 1.5. So Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which allocates money in just Northern Virginia, because we have a special sales tax up here, they're looking at people asking for $43 billion of projects for all of these jurisdictions in the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. And Prince William's going to show up and say, with Fairfax, oh, could you give us 13.6 billion or $27 billion? We're going to have to explain why that's a higher priority project than all of these other projects from all of these other jurisdictions in order for us to get the funding. The long range plan, you got to have a vision. It's certainly not going to happen if you don't ask for it. So if you put this proposal in the Prince William County Comprehensive Plan, we're doing one now with a mobility chapter, a land use chapter, and a housing chapter now in development. If you put the proposal of blue line or yellow line in eastern Prince William County, you're looking ahead 20, maybe 40 years. And it is the sort of vision that gets you a transformed community. But you're going to have to argue to others that it's the right thing to fund, and don't fund that other project that somebody else has a vision of. Fund our project. Now we could get it. We could get it by planning ahead. We could ask for the money. We could outcompete the other jurisdictions. We know the criteria for these grants. We know what it takes for us to get ranked highly compared to other projects proposed by other jurisdictions. One of the key things is density, what Victor Angry mentioned. The magic word here is density. Planning people use categories of T2, T3, T4, T5. Greater density, the bigger the number, the greater the density. So the Metro planners were looking at the density we needed to have within 1/4 mile of North Woodbridge, the landing at Prince William, Potomac Mills, Potomac Town Center, Southbridge, and Triangle. We needed relatively high density development within 1/4 mile and extending out to 1/2 mile. Look at the numbers. These are relatively high density projects or relatively high density proposals for land use. This is what it looks like on the map. Close to walking distance of these proposed metro stations, we need high density development. We need customers that are going to walk to the metro. If you have customers that live 2 miles away and they get in the car, they don't necessarily drive and park at Metro. They get in the car and they drive up I-95, I-395. Mode shift is hard. We lose 90% of the customers if they have to go from one mode to another. People who walk to the train will take the train. People who drive to the train might drive to their destination instead. So in our comprehensive plan, we have a chart which will help your eyes glaze over and enable you to sleep at night if you want to read all of the details. But if you look to the right side of the chart, you can see the target building height for T4, T5. We're looking at tall structures, places with elevators being built within 1/4 mile of 6 spots in Prince William County, identified as stations for future Metro. So this is what T3 and T4 looks like. This is the type of development that you should be expecting next to these high capacity transit stations. Without this development, we don't have the customers that will get on the train. Without the customers that are going to get on the train, we're not going to rank highly in our grant application. And if we don't rank highly in our grant application, we're not going to get $13.6 to $27 billion in order to extend Metro to Prince William. This is the higher density development. We're talking what Potomac Mills could look like, what VRE could look like right next to the Woodbridge station. This is the sort of future that would be the density for Prince William County. You'll hear a lot of people object to adding density to Prince William County. You'll hear a lot of people object to adding growth to Prince William County. But you're not going to get Metrorail unless you have customers. You're not going to win grants unless you have a cost-effective proposal. You're not going to have a cost-effective proposal if you have 2-story townhomes within all surrounding 1/4 mile of the metro station. Now, Vienna got a metro station without a whole lot of development back in the past. But that was a political game in the 1970s in Fairfax County. They're now redeveloping. Metro West project is being redeveloped near the Vienna metro station. And this is the sort of density that you see planned right next to the Vienna metro station. Without density, we don't get metro. Without density, we don't get metro. Now, we could sabotage the proposal to get metro to Prince William. The idea that we're not going to have growth, and I hear a lot of people tell me that we need to stop this growth. It's not a viable option. There's no wall. There's no moat. People have the right and the opportunity to move to Prince William County. So the trick is not to pretend that we're not going to grow, but to shape where we're going to grow. That's what this 2040 comprehensive plan allows us to do, to shape that we're going to put development where we want the metro stations. That's where we want the density, because we know density is the key to transit. We know we're not going to have successful grant applications for $13.6 billion or $27 billion unless we have an adequate density at 6 particular locations in Prince William County. Not 10, not 14, not 20, 6 particular locations where we want to put metro stations. We need high density within a quarter mile of those proposed station sites, or we're not going to get the grants. And if we don't get the grants, we're not going to be able to build the proposal. Now, the issue is, will our land use chapter concentrate density there or not? If you look at the current draft of the land use chapter, it's got all the sweet words and the objectives and the action strategies, but the map is an appalling sprawl of scattering development. Just about everywhere there was a blank spot on the map that they could plant 3-story townhouses. We know that we're going to add about 10,000 more dwelling units in Prince William by 2040. At least that's the population projection. We anticipate 10,000 more people coming here. Post-COVID, post people telecommuting, we might not even get, I'm sorry, not 10,000 more people, about 30,000 more people than we've already planned for. That's why we need about 10,000 more dwelling units. That's probably the high end of the projection. If you put 10,000 dwelling units in 6 locations, you might really be competitive for some grants. And one proposal is to put enough dwelling units at Potomac Mills to accommodate 7,000 people. So we are at risk of planning smart and putting those necessary new dwelling units at 6 locations in eastern Prince William County. We're also at risk of scattering them, as you see on the map here, all across Prince William County, in which case we're not going to have the density next to the metro stations. Did I mention if we don't have the density next to the metro stations, we're not going to have the customers? And if we don't have the customers, we're not going to be cost effective. And if we're not cost effective, we're not going to win the grant. And if we don't win the grants, we're not going to build metro. I think I mentioned it. So here are the land use designations in one of the drafts of the land use chapter. And you can see that we're trying to build a town center out in Gainesville. So instead of putting people at 6 locations where we want to build metro, we're proposing to add people in Gainesville where there won't be any metro. There will be no orange line. And if we move people to Gainesville, we only got about 10,000 dwelling units to add by 2040. If you move a bunch of them to Gainesville, then you're not going to have them next to the metro stations. And if you move them to Gainesville, then all of a sudden you're going to have the need for other infrastructure proposals. Bi-County Parkway is one of the ideas that are being floated. So if we're asking for not only metro station money, but we'd also like highway money to build this Bi-County Parkway, what do you think the chances are that we'll be successful in our grant applications? So we have places that we could put people in Potomac Mills, for example, but if we don't put enough people there, if we don't plan it to be dense enough, then we're not going to have a successful grant application. So here's the type of land use map that you have in Prince William County's latest version of the land use chapter. We're inviting for people to build along Route 1 at places where there'll be no metro station. We're inviting developers to build a little bit at the landing at Prince William and a little bit at Potomac Mills, but not necessarily enough to be competitive in the grant applications. So here are my 3 questions that I conclude with tonight. If you're interested in getting Metro to Prince William County, we need to prepare our land use chapter to help us be competitive for mobility grants. If you're going to draw a metro station line in the mobility chapter, it has to be consistent with where we're drawing the housing lines in the land use chapter. Are we going to put housing next to the proposed metro station sites? How many people are we going to have in walking and biking distance so that they're really going to be metro customers and not in a car spewing greenhouse gas emissions and clogging the highway? And if we put all of our planned projected development next to those metro stations, we just might be competitive for those funding grants. But if we take a significant percentage of our predicted population growth and scatter them to Gainesville and the fairgrounds and hamlets in the Nowheresville part of Prince William County, we scatter that development rather than create dense concentrated development, then we are basically sabotaging our opportunity to get Metro. So the question is, will we get it? Or are we at this point looking at the last opportunity to shape land use so that we could get Metro to Prince William? And I think we'll know at the end of the year. We're supposed to be finishing this comprehensive plan, these 3 remaining chapters at the end of the year. So the question I posed originally, are we going to get Metrorail to Prince William County, is basically rephrasing in this conversation to, are we going to plan the housing in Prince William County so we could get Metro in Prince William County? Don't know. We'll find out. Invite you to participate in the comprehensive plan conversations, because those are the places where we determine the future of Metro. That's the question for us to answer. Where do we want to put the housing? And if we want to put the housing next to the future Metro stations, we have a chance. So that's what I have for you tonight.
Thanks so much, Charlie. I can see that the discussion is already starting in the chat. So I'll circle back there, and then you can raise your hand by going to reactions and click on that button and raise your hand, and I'll call on you and invite you in. So we'll start with Elena. Do you want to unmute yourself and come in? Elena?
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm on my phone because I can't get my computer volume to work. So I just wanted to ask Charlie how mass transit plays a key role in affordable housing. We have lots of discussions about affordable housing, and I'm just curious what his response is to that question, and I'll mute myself now.
So my answer is that transit, both mass and not mass, is fundamental to affordable housing. We're struggling with affordable housing. We have our teachers and our hospital workers living in Culpeper County and Stafford County and Caroline County because the cost of living in Prince William is too high. So they're having to drive till they qualify. They're having to live someplace far and commute to us because we haven't developed enough housing with easy access to jobs. So the transit issue is also, I think, fundamentally the job issue. If we put the houses there and the jobs here, then we end up having to go from house to job. If you put the jobs and the houses together, if you build housing around the hospital, if you build housing around the schools, if you build housing around the transit stations, then people could ideally walk and bike from house to job. Practically, not everybody in the house is going to have a job next door. So ideally, they'd be able to take transit to their jobs. And the beauty of mass transit, what you see with Metrorail, is that it extends the access to jobs across the region. So VRE takes you to only a few places. Metrorail takes you to more places, but both offer you the opportunity to have at least one member of the family be willing to commute to a really high quality job somewhere. And so transit gives you access to jobs. Transit is necessary, if you look with an equity lens, for us to improve the status of our equity emphasis areas. And transit is, if near enough for people to get to without having to spend extra money for a car, transit is the solution to a lot of different problems.
Yeah, that's the walkable community, right, Charlie? Is you also, if you can walk to your mass transit, then you don't need to have 2 cars per family. Maybe you only need 1 car. So obviously you don't have to worry about insurance, car payments, and all those other things that obviously increase your monthly payments.
Right. For the individual family, that's a factor for them economically. For society at large, it gets a car off the highway, it gets greenhouse gas emissions out of the tailpipe, or it improves quality of life for a whole lot of people. Not everybody wants to live in that setting, but we have certainly a lot of opportunity to create high quality communities next to transit stations that are walkable and bikeable. And access to transit gives you access to a lot of different things, including good jobs.
Thanks, Charlie. Douglas, do you want to come in?
Yeah, my question, I think Charlie already answered my question. My question was about the comprehensive plan and is there a viable build out strategy for focusing growth in the comprehensive plan? But it sounds like the comprehensive plan draft is really cake and ice cream and a lot of added density in a lot of places, and not focus growth in maybe future transit areas like the Route 1 corridor. So I guess my question is, does a comprehensive plan have to have a more realistic growth strategy and sort of build out scenario? Because it sounds like this is more than 10,000, or is this 10,000 housing units, or is this 30,000? And are there some levers to get, if they really want to have an activity center in Potomac Mills, or Woodbridge, or wherever? It doesn't seem like a very viable or realistic plan as it stands.
I wouldn't consider it a viable or realistic plan as it stands, because the words don't match the map. So we say one thing, but if you look at the map, it's inconsistent. It isn't clear to me how many houses they're planning for on that map. Or to me, that's pretty fundamental. Or you have to have a population guesstimate. People argue about the guesstimate, but at some point you pick a number. Or I'm going with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments number and with the census statistics for average number of people per house. And my guesstimate is we need to add about 10,000 more dwelling units. And the comprehensive plan that we have today, staff did no favors to the Planning Commission when they produced this draft, because it doesn't provide for 10,000 houses to be concentrated in a few places. It seems to color in a lot of areas for speculative development. And I guess you're going to have to someday come back in the mobility chapter and say, oh, we need to widen this road in order to accommodate all that scattered growth too. So they didn't do a good job in the map of identifying where to grow. They colored in a lot of different places. And it's up to the Planning Commission and up to the Board of County Supervisors to correct what's broke in the current draft.
Great, thanks. Randy Free, do you want to come in?
Sure, thank you. Charlie, that was just a wonderful presentation. I hope that, well, I wish that Planning Commissioner and Supervisor were, because I think it's just terrific information. I have 2 questions. The first one relates to the chicken and egg aspect of this. You've created a really compelling case that the only way that we can get Metro to work in Prince William County, the vast majority of human is high density. But the egg problem is that the really high density doesn't work, I don't think, unless you have mass transit. And if it takes 30 or 40 years to get into Prince William County, and you're developing on the scale of 5 or 10 years, doesn't that leave kind of a huge gap between when you've brought all these people in and when you have the transit options to move them to where the jobs are? So that's question number one.
So let me answer one at a time, because I'm not that
Okay.
good at remembering things.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
And actually, there was a second question I saw coming up. How do you get involved in the planning process? And the answer is Google Pathway to 2040 Prince William County, Pathway to 2040. And that'll take you into the information the county's produced on the draft land use chapter, housing chapter, mobility chapter. Or I think you asked a really challenging question here, Randy. It's dangerously practical rather than theoretical and idealistic. So I'll offer a solution that I think could work. And that is we start building next to the existing VRE stations. So North Woodbridge is a really good place for us to plant a lot of development. I think one proposal in the small area plan had us building out for 15,000 new residents to move into the town center at North Woodbridge. And as they move into that town center, they do have access to VRE. They do have access to Amtrak. And with the Virginia Rail Passenger Authority improving the number of trains going up and down the tracks, we have a lot of capacity to accommodate people getting into the urban core by way of rail. There is also right there on I-95, I-395, our upgraded bus capacity on the center lanes, those reversible center lanes, so that you could move people into the urban core that way. Obviously, my solution is bring jobs to Prince William rather than export workers to other jurisdictions. So I would like to see people be able to come into Prince William and they do a reverse commute on I-395 into North Woodbridge. And that's a very attractive place for our high-tech workers that are currently driving to Fort Belvoir to come a little bit further south and come to jobs in Prince William. Two biggest job centers in our area are Fort Belvoir and Quantico. And we have I-95, I-395, and VRE Amtrak providing service to really both of those locations. The other place where you could build up and build out is Potomac Shores, which is building a VRE station. And so if they actually build a VRE station, if VRE survives COVID, then you look at Potomac Shores, that's a place where you could be building T4 and T5 and even town center T6 level development so that you have 20-story buildings. And if you look at the land use chapter, you can see where they're sketching out where to build T2, T3, T4, T5, T6 density. It's a moving target. So every time they have a public meeting, it's a different map and a different proposal. I sure hope it's a very different map before we're finished. But I would start at North Woodbridge and start building the capacity at North Woodbridge. And if you look at Potomac Town Center, that's not far from I-60, I-95. You could probably do bus transit up I-95, and you could do bus transit down I-95 to get workers into Potomac Town Center. So those would be the places I would start.
Okay, thanks.
Other question?
Answer. Yes, the other question, which is also sort of how do you solve two biggest problems? The first, chicken and egg. The second being, how do we get money? It strikes me that the infrastructure bill and the potential for additional funding through Build Back Better could be a real win for these kinds of projects. And I have no doubt that in the past, money has, and that there's been really stiff competition for projects. And, you know, the picture you painted was one that is not very rosy in terms of Prince William County's ability to compete for funding and to get Metrorail and the other county governments on our side. However, A, isn't money going to be a lot more readily available? And B, don't we have a more compelling case than a lot of our neighbors in terms of vehicle mile travel, gas emission reductions that we can get. Given that so many of our commuters are going long distances to the urban core, isn't there a pretty good case to be made? Hey, building Metrorail stations out in Prince William County gets you a lot more greenhouse gas emission reductions than it would elsewhere. So it couldn't be easier to get in the near future than it's been in the past. Thank you.
I think you could make the case. I think you also need to consider that there's another alternative that might be the most cost-effective alternative of all. Instead of spending $13 to $27 billion on Metro, could we upgrade telework to the point where we aren't actually having to put those people from point A to point B 5 days a week? Could we, for example, knock out 40% of the transit, 40% of the congestion by having people telework 2 days a week on a continuing basis? And all of the projected demand for things like the Route 28 bypass are highly speculative with the shift in work patterns today. The European investors who put $2 billion into the I-66 expansion, I think are at high risk of discovering that there's not enough congestion for people to pay for hopping on the toll express lanes versus the remaining I-66 lanes. And if we want to be building transportation infrastructure, we're talking about moving people from point A to point B. But if in the future we're using telework to move conversation and information from point A to point B, the demand for a lot of that transportation might be lower than we have predicted. So that's the greatest threat of all to getting Metrorail to Prince William County, is that we don't really need to move to the office, and I can telework 2 or 3 or even 4 days a week.
Sorry, but if that is the case, couldn't that argument be used for putting the rural crescent rather than in the equity emphasis areas and really going?
You can make that argument, but the better argument is the folks down in Nelson County who have been booming in the last 2 years because the attractive recreational areas in the mountains are in fact the places where a lot of these folks are moving. So I think you're likely to find that lower cost land in much more attractive places, Blacksburg and places like that, might in fact be the competitors, not, the edge of Prince William County. That, it's a lot nicer to live in Roanoke and a lot nicer to live in Stanton and a lot nicer to live in some of these rural areas where the cost of living is really low. And if you're telecommuting, I've got a relative who's telecommuting and hasn't even told his boss. The boss doesn't know that he's moved. He shows up once a week at the office like he has to, but he's living in a community that's 25% lower cost of living.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kevin, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, and I appreciate Charlie's talk. But one of the things that I notice when people are talking about transit is that there is a great focus on going from home to work. And I learned recently that 60% of all car trips, according to the Department of Energy, are 6 miles or less. So one way to combat congestion would be to have, people feel safe walking or biking to do very local, 2 mile, 5 mile trips in general. And that's just an enormous amount of these trips that are possible to do that people would not feel comfortable doing right now unless they're kind of adventurous and risk taking to travel across big roads and stuff. So that is my comment.
And I'm going to concur 100% with what Kevin said, particularly as e-bikes make it easy for us to go back and forth without breaking a sweat. So you can dress for work and not have to take a shower when you get there if you're using your e-bike. And a lot of the transportation that is sending out greenhouse gas emissions, those 60% of local trips, are well within range of an e-bike trip. And an e-bike's $600 as opposed to an expensive car.
Yeah. We have a quick, I see, just to reiterate, in our follow-up email, I'll include the link to the Pathway to 2040. So if you're interested in becoming more involved in this process, you'll be able to do so through that link. So thank you for that question, and Charlie for mentioning that. Nikki had a question. Do you want to jump in and unmute yourself and ask if she's still here?
Yes, I just wanted to know those areas. It looks like the T4 and T5. I was looking at the development. Are those going to be new? Is that new construction or pre-existing?
Good question. We've got some T4, T5 communities, but mostly we're looking at new development. So you're looking at taking something like Potomac Town Center and expanding it into areas around it, or take the parking lot around Potomac Mills and fill it with facilities that look like the IDI building at North Woodbridge. So you can see the possibility of new construction creating a place that is T4, T5 type development. Lorton Town Center is one of the places where you might see something like that, or Fairfax Town Center is places where you might see something like that. When you get to T5 and T6, you're talking the 20-story buildings, and that's what you see around Boston, places like that. So we're talking new development, accommodating new growth, and in some cases, revitalizing parking lots in our old development that is ready for redevelopment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joseph, do you want to pop in and ask your question?
Sure. I might be making myself out to be a villain here, but I think one of the ways that the interest could be created, so to speak, is I guess inviting toll roads along the railway and using those tolls paid to invest back into the railway to suggest that people, take it. I wouldn't say something massively extortive to do that, but like nickel and diming people who take those roads, it'll present a better alternative while still paying into that.
And my understanding is Virginia only has 2 toll roads that are actually profitable. One is the Dulles Greenway, and the other is that portion of I-66 inside the Beltway, which was already built before the state of Virginia imposed a toll on it. So the other toll roads we have across Virginia, the Pocahontas Parkway down in Richmond, just barely manages to generate enough money to pay for maintenance of the Pocahontas Parkway. Our other toll roads are using the tolls to pay for their current operating costs, but they don't spin off a profit that you could use for much else. The exception to that is the I-66 inside the Beltway, where the state of Virginia put a toll on that road, and they use that to subsidize the bus service that's coming in from Gainesville and places like that. So we are able to do what you're recommending on that particular spot.
Yeah, that is sort of what I was suggesting, like just the roads along the same paths as the trains, and then not necessarily investing that money back into the roads, but into the train to make that a more attractive alternative to the roads, which will inevitably get congested and people feel that they don't want to travel those roads, and the train is much faster, so they want to take the train.
And of course, we do already have the I-95, I-395, our hot lanes with our toll road, and the private company gets the profit associated with the tolls there. That's assuming there is a profit. If we built another set of roads paralleling the CSX tracks, we might actually pull riders off of the train rather than enhance people going onto the train. That's the issue with the proposed ferry. There's a ferry proposal from our Occoquan over to our Maryland shoreline. And that's another way for us to move commuters out of Prince William and enhance the commercial development somewhere else. And if you move commuters by ferry, that's just a few more commuters that won't be on VRE.
Mark, do you want to come in?
Sure. Thanks, Charlie, for the great talk. Yeah, just to follow up on the previous conversation. Yeah, the I-95 hot lanes actually are helping fund the Transforming Rail in Virginia project. So that's already happening a lot. And obviously the Dulles Toll Road basically built the Metro Silver Line. So, you know, that's been happening a lot in Virginia as we go forward. But again, as far as Prince William's concerned, you know, things that, you know, as we kind of go along this process, it really comes down to kind of a balance between, you know, how do we actually increase transit service, you know, as we kind of edge up to Metro. And I feel that, you know, we need to, if we're going to invest in Metro, we need to invest in our bus services too. And how do we do that? And, you know, I feel like, how do we correlate those things together? You know, we talk about high density, but, you know, how do we reduce vehicle parking relative to affordable housing, relative to increasing transit frequencies, and how to balance that out, I think, is one area that I think we're missing as we try to, you know, we got to build up to a Metro concept. And, you know, if we don't do those aspects, people will be like, well, you can't build high density because that will just generate more cars. So I just think that, you know, as we kind of go through this process, I think it's important to look at those aspects as we develop our land use. Is how do we build up to Metro to get to a point where, you know, we can be a successful grant application as we go forward. And just, you know, it's definitely a struggle based on looking at the current land use map. But again, Charlie, I really like everything you've presented here, and I think it's good information for people to learn and understand about, you know, what we're up against to really help improve quality of life in the county.
And I can be the skunk at the picnic here, in that if you really want to improve the quality of life in our community, maybe the most effective investment is a better local bus service for those trips within 6 miles, not Metro to take people to places far, far away. And that if we really were trying to improve community and their quality of life within Prince William, 13.7 billion to improve the bus service would make a spectacular change in our ability to get around within Prince William, as opposed to haul people up to DC.
Yeah, I agree. All right, do we have other comments or questions? At this point, feel free to unmute and pop in. Yeah, just to reiterate what Elena is saying, investment in our bus system. I mean, we have the infrastructure already. It makes a lot of sense to use and build up what we have.
One of the proposals Mark Schaeffler's proposed is that we put a toll on the Route 28 bypass. So if there is in fact a demand for people to drive on the Route 28 bypass, then pay for it by putting a toll on it. Right now, the county taxpayers are shelling out $200 million plus $100 million from NVTA to build a road that's essentially going to take you from the Route 234 to Centerville, when everybody could go on 234 to I-66 at Gainesville and get to Centerville probably faster. But we're going to spend $200 million in local tax dollars on the Route 28 bypass. If there's a demand for that road post-COVID, post-telecommuting, then let's let the toll payers, let the users pay for it. I know it's not politically popular to recommend toll roads, but let the beneficiaries pay for the cost. And we could take $200 million and build about 1,000 units of affordable housing in Prince William County and put a dent in the challenge of providing housing for our teachers and our nurses and our other workers. So I could see a whole lot better use for $200 million than building a road for Stafford, Fauquier, and Culpeper commuters to drive through Prince William to jobs in Fairfax and Arlington and Loudoun.
Yeah, good point.
200 million for the bus system, 200 million for the bus system.
Randy, come on in.
Okay, one more question, Charlie. So laid out here, and the risks of not getting, the difficulty of creating development. If you were king, or at least king of Prince William, how would you be going or not? In other words, I'm turning around the question posed to the rest of us.
Yeah, given the opportunity to invest a little bit of money, which is realistic for us to have as opposed to 13 to 27 billion, I would put it into facilitating our bus transit and e-bikes for the economically challenged, so that we could address the issue we have today of moving people to local jobs from local houses. The relatively high-paid workers that are going to jobs in Fairfax and Arlington and DC don't need as much government support. What we need to do is make it possible for people to get back and forth to work at Lowe's and to work at the 7-Eleven and to work at the Centera Hospital. And those folks, if they lived in Prince William County, I think would be my priority for facilitating their mobility, not mobility to export workers to another jurisdiction, if I were king.
That would be an interesting transit map to see.
Well, it doesn't fit the need for an edifice complex, so we're not going to build something big and shiny. It would just simply be serviceable and useful, and doesn't have the ribbon cutting opportunity that a Metrorail station has. But none of the elected officials we have today will be alive whenever they cut the ribbon for a metro station in Prince William County. It's just not that realistic.
Yeah.
Charlie, I have a comment and question. It seems to me that considering what they want to pay for the 28 bypass, wouldn't it make sense to make the area around Manassas Mall a high density T5 or T4, create a VRE station there and run it up to as a spur to connect to the existing line? It seems to me with the amount of money we're spending, we could have a mass transit hub there with parking. A lot of the people are coming up from Culpeper and Point South up from 28 through our county, and if they could end up in that area, we could have a massive development area there without infringing upon Old Town Manassas. Then you'd have your transit into up through Manassas Park with possible stations there, and increase the density in that older section. It seems like a more viable area. And same thing with the independent, or the where 28 crosses into Fairfax County. You're already talking about high density for that area, and that would fit with that whole scenario.
Yeah, I would support revitalization of Manassas Mall. I'm not a fan actually of rail. Rail is a inflexible transit system, whereas buses enable you to adjust to accommodate, adapt for the changing patterns of business and housing. So I'm a real fan of busways and the bus capacity for us to move people. The trains, of course, move a whole lot more people. You get, you know, 120 people on a VRE car, and you put 6 cars behind one locomotive with 2 workers, and you have pretty cost-effective transit compared to 40 people on a bus. But if you don't have a whole lot of people going from point A to point B, what we need is a flexible network of transportation. And that's where buses and bikes give you a lot more capacity to move people to different places. But if you look at the Manassas Mall, it doesn't take a whole lot of thought to see that you could take the Manassas Mall and the current Vulcan Quarry, which is about to close because they're dug so deep, it's not cost effective to haul the rock to the surface, and Innovation south of there. And you can have a really nice redevelopment zone, or using the Sudley corridor for transit of some sort to get to the I-66 if you want. But if your goal is to build local community with local jobs and local housing, that's a great place for us to do that. Our City of Manassas is going to plan something like that for its Mathis Avenue Shopping Center. They've already identified that as the next downtown for Manassas. And to answer Randy's question, the way they started is first they build 4-story units to replace what they have for the shopping center. And when there's enough people that are living there and enough demand for more people, they tear down the 4-story units and they replace them with 8-story units. And that is the 20-year, 30-year program for the Mathis Avenue Shopping Center. And if you run a shuttle bus to VRE, then you've got yourself transit capacity, or with an acceptable mode shift, perhaps, if it's an attractive shuttle bus. We'll see.
The reason I like the idea of the VRE extension rather than vehicles or buses is that the width of the area that you need for the alternative is significantly more, which means you have to take more houses, which means you delay implementing it that much longer, and the costs are cheaper, and you could have bike lanes in there and still not have as wide a swath going up through there. And it would force a lot of people to consider building around the Manassas Mall instead of commuting from down south, and you could have more low-income housing in that area and more density. That's all.
Yeah, we've actually got a lot of low-income housing around Manassas Mall. It's a community that is an equity emphasis area. We are about to blow up one of those areas by running the Route 28 bypass through one of the few places where we have affordable housing. Or, you know, it's just a matter of your priorities. If it's more important for you to facilitate commuters from Stafford and Culpeper and Fauquier to drive through Prince William, then take down 50 houses occupied by a largely Hispanic community. And if it's less important for you to facilitate those commuters, then don't build the road. And to take your idea and to put it to work in some alternative. I'm not sure you're ever going to get a VRE extension. We've been through 2 studies. I think that one is a boat that's already sailed. But we have other possibilities for transportation and mobility.
But I mean, for the, what is it, like $300 million you're going to need for that little section of 28 as a bypass?
Yeah, if you want to throw away $300 million, that's a great way to throw away money. You should just burn it in the parking lot.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Wouldn't rail extension be significantly cheaper?
No, because you can't get through that pathway with the rail extension. You can't get there from where the rail stops at Broad Run to where you could. Yeah, you couldn't get. Yeah, the rail people will tell you you can't get there from here. And that's why they did a couple of studies. They said they couldn't even get to Innovation. So they couldn't get to Innovation from Broad Run. So if they can't get to Innovation.
Is it the grade or what?
Yeah, they couldn't get across Route 28 without building a very expensive ramp to either go under or over 28. Yeah, I'm not convinced we're ever going to build the Route 28 bypass. It's not the least environmentally practical or alternative. It is a wetlands killer. It's a community killer. We have an alternative already in the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority grant queue. We're asking to widen 28th as a fallback option. So I wouldn't suggest giving up on the Route 28 bypass. I think it's one of those projects that's worthy of us to continue to fight until the last breath.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to make sense to run a major highway up a flood zone.
Talk me into it. I agree with you.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Charlie. We're 5 past 8:30. This has been a terrific conversation. I think that we've covered a lot of ground just looking at the economics of this project and potentially what it would look like to compete to get Metro, but in the process exploring other possibilities to meet the needs of people here in Prince William and those on the east that perhaps need would benefit from more investment in terms of public transit. And I'll follow up with an email and provide links to the pathway to 2040 and Charlie's talk, and we will continue this discussion because there's clearly a lot to unpack here. So Charlie, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight and for participating in a lively and great discussion.